Hello guys and welcome. Today we are going to be doing a Photoshop tutorial. Now this is going to be a super basic tutorial, so if you already know a little bit about Photoshop, maybe you want to catch up in some later episodes because this is going to be a series. But to kind of start off, let's get familiar with Photoshop. And like I said, this is if you have not used Photoshop before or really at all, and are looking to do some light video editing, or sorry, photo editing for this episode. For this episode, we're going to kind of go over, like I said, the layout of Photoshop, but we're also going to go over a little bit of how to get files into Photoshop. And the biggest things we're going to cover is the crop tool and adjusting photos. So here I just have a new document. It's just a blank document. And so how we're going to get our photo into Photoshop, well, there's a few different ways you can do that. So the first way is something that I will use quite often, and all you have to do is take the photo, like the one that I have right here, and drag it onto the Photoshop icon, and it will be opened. Now you can see that it was opened in a new artboard is what this is called. And so if you already have some sort of work going on, then you might want to try a different method, which can be just as easy as dragging and dropping. And there you would just be able to constrain your the size of this with these handles here. And a quick tip is if you press shift while you do this, it will constrain proportionally. So if I go back to the original photo here, we can delete this and try again. So now that it's in here, we can, and we want to keep the original size, we can press shift and it just goes bigger and smaller, the exact size. Whereas if I let go of shift, I can scrunch it really tight up or pull it really far down, go sideways, any way that I want. And if you are looking for some accurate photos, you're going to want to make sure that you use the shift key while you do this so that the sizes all stay the same. But one of the most accurate ways to be able to get something into Photoshop is coming over here to File, and you can say Place Linked, and it's just going to open up a browser for your computer. And here I can see my photo that I want to edit, and I just say Place. And we get the same thing as we would if we dragged it into the Photoshop document. Now to get a little bit more familiar with the layout of Photoshop, we first off have up here this top bar here, and you have File, Edit, Image, Layer, Type, Select, Filter, 3D, View, Window, and Help. And so like a lot of programs, there's going to be lots of different commands and stuff in here, but mostly you'll probably be going between File and Edit, but every now and then you'll be going into Image. I don't think I've ever really used Layer or Type or Select really, but Filter I've used quite a bit. So then next is on this, we'll place this down real quick actually, so that you actually have to confirm that it's in the position that you want it. But anyway, we'll get over to this. So the first tool here is actually the Move tool, and it's just basically you move whatever you're clicking on. And you have a bunch of different tools down here. And then right down here I'll talk about real quick as well. You have your foreground and background color. So this is going to be helpful when we get to the brush tool and gradient tool as well. But we can also see up top here, we have some different adjustments that we can make to the tools. Each tool has a little bit of a different set of settings and instructions that you can give the tool to be able to do different things. So the first thing that we're going to do is crop this photo. So the crop tool is the 1, 2, 3, 4th tool on the left side usually. And up here you can see that we're able to change the ratio between some preset ratios, as well as create our own with these boxes here. We'll get to the straighten tool here in a little bit. This is a tool that we can use to get this grid here, the rule of thirds grid. But for right now, which is very helpful for photography. Then you have just a regular grid and some other different things, but the rule of thirds is probably the most helpful to me. There's a few different settings in here that I haven't really played with, but you can also check if you want to actually delete the cropped pixels that we do crop out, and we'll get to that as well. But we'll also come over to this side. Now my setup is going to be very different from yours. I have a very basic setup, and you can play with it as much as you want, and it's super easy to do. You just have to click and hold on the title of whatever, and you can see I can add this to this section here, or I can pull it back out and it's going to be right here. We also have this side here, and right now what I have is the history, which is super helpful because to undo something with Control Z, you can only go back once. So if I press Control Z, maybe not. We'll crop it real quick just to show this off. But I can press Control Z, and then that last action is going to go away. And over here I just have color and adjustments, which we'll get to in a little bit. Down here is a very important section. This is where your layers are. So layers is kind of the key structure to Photoshop. So you can see that we have the default background layer actually. That's this white part here, behind here. And then we have our photo. And the photo is just on top of it. Now if I had another layer, I can make another layer, and it's going to be transparent at first, but let's say I'll just quickly color this white, for instance. Now I have white over this, but if I change it so that this layer is below my photo, the white part that I just brushed over with is now underneath the other photo. And we can even see that if I do a different color here, say black, you can see that the black is coming in behind the photo. And that actually ended up on the background layer because I deleted the first one. So you have to make sure that which layer you're on. But we'll also get more into that as we go on and in further episodes. So today we're going to, let's just delete this real quick so that we just have the photo, and you can see this checkered pattern. That is a universal sign for transparency. So right now if I were to export this photo, whatever's behind the photo right now would be transparent. And that's not super important for us today, but it's a good thing to know. So the first thing we're going to go over is the crop tool. The crop tool is pretty simple. A lot of people have used something like it. You just take these corners, and if you say want to crop out, it looks like there's a little bit of a house down here. So if we just kind of do that, cut it a little bit shorter, and then if we you can just do whatever you want really. And if you press enter, then there you go, you have your cropped picture. However, let's go back, Command Z. One thing that I end up using quite a bit is the straighten tool. And so what the straighten tool does is you just draw a line, and it's going to make it so that that is going to be the straight line. So for instance, if I say that this diagonal angle is what is straight in the picture, usually it's good to have a something that is perfectly horizontal in your picture, or something you want perfectly horizontal in your picture. If you do that, it's going to switch it so that that line that we just made is going to be a perfect horizontal representation of our crop. And you can see that the picture is now skewed because of that. So for today, let's just say that we want it straight, and this is pretty straight, but you can see how it works. And just crop it in a little bit so that we don't have any more of the transparency. Make sure we get rid of that house there. Press enter, and there we go. So the next thing I'm going to cover is the adjustments over here. So this is the adjustments panel, and the way that you get to that is hitting window up here and making sure that adjustments has a check mark next to it. Now this is how you're going to be able to also get to all sorts of different settings windows and different panels, like I said. So the first one that we have is brightness and contrast. Then we have levels, curves, exposure, vibrance, hue, saturation, color balance, black and white, photo filter, channel mixer, color lookup, invert, polarize, threshold, selective color, and gradient map. Now for today, we are just going to go over brightness and contrast, levels, and hue and saturation. So the first one, brightness and contrast, is very straightforward. As you can see, I have two sliders here for brightness and contrast. Makes sense, right? And you can also see that there is a layer down here. Now we'll get to more of that later, but there are some really interesting things that you can do with that. But you can start to play with some of this. If we turn the brightness down, obviously the picture is going to get darker. Bright, it's going to become brighter. So for this picture in particular, let's brighten it up a little bit. And you can also type in this section here. I like to keep my numbers even just because I have OCD. Now contrast is going to, if you bump it down, it's going to make the colors less saturated, and it's going to be a little bit duller. If you want it to be very saturated, you bring it up. And so I'm going to bring up the saturation just a little bit here. Let's say 20. And there would be an edited photo. However, I find hue and saturation to be a better way to do this. So if I can just hit delete on this one. In hue and saturation, you have more settings. So hue, we're going to get a little bit of a tint. So we have a little bit more of a green tint, yellow tint, and then a red tint. And this way a little bit more bluish, purple, pink, red, and it gets the orange over there. It is a little bit weird to work with, but sometimes you can come up with some pretty cool stuff. Like that looks pretty cool actually. It doesn't look good, but it looks cool. So the next thing is saturation. This is very similar to contrast and the other setting. If you bump it down, it gets closer to black and white, and if you bump it up, it can actually get like this. So for today, let's just bump it up just a little. Say 30 is perfect. And then lightness is the same as brightness is in this other setting. And you can get dark and really bright. And you can also tell that there is a slight difference to how these behave. So the saturation in this one, you can get something close to this, but if we go back down to what the original picture was and go to brightness and contrast, contrast is a little bit more subtle in how it works. It still looks a little bit more true to life versus over here in saturation, where we start to get some digital effects that we most likely don't want. So let's turn this back to 0, or actually we can just delete these guys so that we can go over one last adjustment that is really easy to use to make your photos just look a little bit better. So this one is called levels. Now, if you know photo or photography, this might be something that you're familiar with, but either way, this is a representation of lights and darks. So what I found the best way to be able to use this is to kind of play it around and figure out what sort of settings match your style. But to kind of give a rundown of it, we have this dark arrow just right here where my cursor is. And if we pull that closer, this is basically the range that we have. And if the darkness is going to be a part of these lighter colors that are part of the picture, then we are going to get a much darker picture. And then we have this light color right here, and we can make everything super bright. All of these dark pixels are going to be really bright. And then this middle one kind of adjusts between the two. So what I like to do is get rid of these just little ends of these levels here. And then I like to find a nice just place where it looks good. Actually, where it is looks the best to me. Now I'll go over quickly on how exactly I would edit this photo. So to begin with, I would have cropped it just the same as this. Actually, let's just go straight from the beginning. Why don't we? Alright, so let's put this into Photoshop, and we get a new document here, remember. And we're not going to save this one, but we're going to crop out this house here. That's all we really need to do today. And if you had, say, a specific size that you wanted to make it, you can do that as well. So that is a 16 by 18. I believe that should be in inches. Pixels per inch is also going to determine the resolution, but for this we can just focus on the actual proportions. But I think that, oh, I almost forgot. So if we have these numbers punched in here, it's going to constrain to that ratio, the 16 to 18 ratio. If we want to get rid of it, all we have to do is hit clear. So I'm just going to crop out this house. That's all I really need to do for this photo. If I press enter, then it's cropped. And next I am probably going to bump up the brightness just a tad. I'm going to say 20, and contrast up to 20 as well. Levels I'm going to play with a little bit just to... And you can see that with those edits that I made with this one, the levels already look a little bit different than they did before. And this will also just make your pictures look a lot richer. So I'm going to bump the saturation just a little, and it's starting to look a little bit dark, so I'm going to bump up the brightness just a hair, like 5. And so that's my edited photo. And another thing that you can do is over in this layer panel, you have this eyeball here. If you click on it, that effect goes away. So we can go back to the original photo and click on all of them, and you can see that we brightened it up and it made it a little bit richer as well with the colors. So that is all for this episode. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments, and any suggestions on what to do for future videos. I will be continuing to make Photoshop tutorials, so subscribe and like the video if you want to see more of it. Thank you.